We are interrupting Red and Blue to bring you some breaking news. Special counsel Robert Mueller has agreed to testify publicly before two House committees on July 17th. That's according to a letter released Tuesday night by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler and House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff. It's in response to a subpoena issued by the committees. Joining me now on the phone are CBS News legal contributor Keir Dougall. He's also a former assistant U.S. attorney for New York's Eastern District. We're also joined by CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. Welcome to both of you. Keir, the special counsel previously indicated he was reluctant to testify. Do we know if any compromises were made in the end for Mueller to agree to appear?
Undoubtedly there were, and we all heard during his press conference that he wanted the report to speak for itself, and he'd hoped that his press conference itself would be the end of his public appearances on the matter. I think most of us watching that press conference viewed that as wishful thinking and expected that there would be intense pressure for him to testify, as we are now learning that he will do on July 17th.
Right. Now, the special counsel wrote a 448-page report, not skimpy. So, Olivia, remind us, what are House Democrats hoping to learn from Mueller's testimony? What have they maybe felt was left out of that report?
Well, Tanya, I think that this is a big, a meaningful, and a hard-fought development because these two committee chairmen, less than being concerned about what was left out of the report, although they have each launched investigations into things that they thought may have been under-scrutinized, have been trying to amplify Mueller's findings amid concern that the release of the report as done by the Attorney General, Bill Barr, kind of hijacked the narrative and downplayed some of the really damaging findings that you can find in both Volume 1, which was focused on the counterintelligence aspect, and Volume 2, which was focused on the obstruction aspect of the president's handling and engagement throughout the 2016 campaign. So I think that they have been struggling to bring to life some of those findings, which in a dense sort of legalistic report really didn't penetrate the American consciousness. And, you know, they've tried to do that via open hearings, calling in witnesses, fact witnesses, people who have been out of government. The House Judiciary Committee just had the president's former communications director, Hope Hicks, join to sort of bring some of these things to life. They haven't done it, but they now have successfully managed to get Mueller himself to reflect on his findings and what they mean. And I think that that's going to be seen as a real victory for the House Democrats at this point.
And Olivia, you mentioned this is going to be an open hearing. So why was having an open hearing versus a closed hearing such a point of contention here?
Well, it's right because, I mean, this was a 2-year really wrenching process, you know, and there was at a certain point, I think what I would describe as something of a hagiography that erupted around Robert Mueller. You know, there was a lot of deflection toward, okay, well, the special counsel is going to resolve a lot of these really troubling questions surrounding what connections actually existed between the Trump campaign and elements of the Russian government. And, you know, when the report came out, there was this real push to just draw more attention to what it actually found. And Mueller, I mean, both chairmen have been full of praise for him, how he conducted himself, how the process was virtually devoid of leaks. And now, you know, he presented this sort of seminal series of findings that they think deserve more attention from the American public.
So these two committees are, you know, linking arms, as Chairman Schiff has said. Can you put this into context for us, Olivia? How significant is it that these two committees combined their efforts?
Well, I think it's an important point to note that they are linking because, you know, as I said, the House Intelligence Committee was really trying to focus on the counterintelligence in Volume 1 of the report, and the House Judiciary Committee was trying to focus on the obstruction findings and really trying to tease those out and remind people, you know, some of these things may not have risen to an indictable offense, a criminal offense, but they are really not good. You know, they're not things that people who are pursuing elected positions should be engaged in. And they're trying to point out that even even though there wasn't a criminal finding on the part of the special counsel, they were potentially unethical, they were potentially immoral, they were potentially compromising for the president and members of his campaign who had these unorthodox interactions with elements of the Russian government.
And certainly keeping the spotlight on those elements is something these committees are after. But Keir, a lot of attention will be on the Democrats, but how can we expect Republicans and the White House to prepare for Mueller's testimony?
Well, one of the questions that I think we'll need to be asking or looking for is whether or not the White House attempts to assert executive privilege with respect to Mr. Mueller. Mm-hmm. He's no longer a member of the government, and so the analysis is slightly different with respect to him. But I will be looking to see whether or not there's a blanket instruction to him that he not testify, as we've heard with respect to other witnesses. That raises the potential of court challenges and questions about why such an invocation would occur.
Right.
Mr. Mueller will be bound by grand jury secrecy rules, by court order, any court orders that cover or require non-disclosure of some of the other dozen or so cases that have spun off of the special counsel investigation. And, of course, matters of national security, which he would have presided over investigation of that Olivia has mentioned in what she just said. He will be bound to keep those matters confidential as well. So I would expect that the Republicans, to the extent that they want to prevent or curtail his testimony, would explore those avenues.
So, Keir, you just mentioned certain topics which will be sort of off the table for the special counsel. We know that also parts of the report were redacted. He will presumably not be able to discuss those sections as well?
Yeah, certainly not in an open session while they're redacted and while those redactions are still in place and haven't been lifted either through an application to have the grand jury materials released by the judge until the litigation or law enforcement matters that have driven court orders for confidentiality, until those, those trials or those investigative steps are no longer in need of confidentiality. Those things are going to remain off limits for public disclosure to protect ongoing investigations and the interests of the grand jury, unless there's some court action to change that status.
So we can expect there are many questions that Mr. Mueller simply will not be able to answer.
There are going to be some, but certainly, going back to his press release, his big takeaways were, and what he worked for 2 years. He was essentially Sphinx-like and quiet for the entire time, except for effectively an 8-minute press conference wherein he said, we were systematically attacked, our election process, by the Russians. This is something that all Americans should be concerned about. And it's a grave threat. I'm sure that he will be able to speak in general terms about that. I would expect, I would hope that both parties in Congress are concerned about whether or not that threat remains active and what Congress and the administration should do about it. The other point that he made in his press conference was that because of the application of this Department of Justice policy that prevented him from seeking an indictment of President Trump, had he had evidence of obstruction by the president, that policy that prevented him from seeking an indictment led him to draw no conclusion, given that there was significant evidence, in his own words, of potential obstructive conduct by President Trump and by members of administration. And he simply did not make a charging decision.
Right.
I would expect him to talk about that as well.
So while it is extremely significant that Robert Mueller has agreed to testify publicly when before he said he would not, Olivia, does anyone really expect any smoking guns to come out of Mueller's testimony? I mean, what would he have to say or indicate to really move the dial for congressional Democrats who are wary of impeachment proceedings?
I think this is a really crucial point, Tanya, because as Keir said, Mueller already sort of laid the groundwork. He said this report is my testimony and that he was not going to provide anything beyond what he and his team had already written down. That's not to say that House Democrats aren't going to give it the old college try. And I should just note that we're getting some new details from Rebecca Kaplan, who is on the Hill for us. She's indicating that Adam Schiff has said that there will be separate hearings for the Judiciary and Intelligence Committee and that each member is going to get 5 minutes to question Mr. Mueller. When asked whether it was a friendly subpoena, the House Intelligence Committee chairman said, "I don't know how I would characterize it. We subpoenaed his testimony. He was very reluctant to come in. He has agreed to honor the subpoena." So it's clear that Mueller is pretty reluctant to make this appearance. He's doing what he has to. He obviously has respect for the rule of law. But I think to get him to engage on some of the things that Democrats really want to hear him say, which is that, he personally would have brought charges against the president if he felt that he could and wasn't bound by this Justice Department policy. He's unlikely to go there if I think is where the smart money might be.
Well, I guess it's clear that a congressional subpoena still holds weight for Robert Mueller. All right. Well, Keir Dougall and Olivia Gazis, thanks to both of you.